Well, it is my great privilege today to interview one of Australia's foremost naturalists. He's perhaps Australia's most experienced bushman. John Young does what you and I would probably never do and spends months of every year camped in a swag in remote areas of Western Queensland and Northern Territory in Western Australia looking for rare and elusive birds. And in 2013, John Young hit the jackpot. John found, together with his friend, the night parrot. The night parrot that was thought to be extinct or at least very, very rare and never seen and never photographed, and John did both. Others since John have also seen the night parrot. The mythical bird is real. The legend's alive. And so John is a fascinating person to talk to. If you've come here looking for some controversy about John, you're not going to find it. I'm not going to get into any of that. With any of these so-called new discoveries, there's always a little bit of argy-bargy in the academic world, but we're going to stick with the man, John Young, and his story of the night parrot. Enjoy. John Young, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today.
Thank you very much for having me. Second time in a couple of weeks.
Yes. Now, that podcast with Michael Greenshields, I would encourage people to have a listen to that on the Birder's Guide. That was brilliant. And thank you for putting yourself out there to do that. That was fantastic.
No, thank you very much. Look, I have to say I've hummed and hard about doing journalistic stuff for a long time because there has been some silly negativity, but need to move on. I've thrown the gauntlet down and now it's upwards and onwards and looking forward to finding more birds and helping people that want to do it.
Absolutely, and that's what this is about. So the Birder's Guide with Michael Greenshields and John Young, you can Google that, you can find it. It's a longer and more extensive interview than what this one will be, so I encourage people to get on and have a listen to that. John, you actually grew up near Armidale, and I spent a number of years there. Where were you? What were you doing up there?
I was born and raised on a property east of Walker on Yarrowitch, a place called Glenhaven. I think it was supposed to be called a place of peace and rest, but there was no peace and rest there as a kid because we worked non-stop and trapped rabbits for a living. That's how we made money, but it also, my father was right into birds at the time, so that's where all my birding stuff started, from when I was about 5.
Yeah, so he showed you around and where nests were and what this was and that was. So you had a love of it from the get-go. Yeah,
I did. I've had sort of, like all young fellas, I collected eggs. I probably collected them longer than most, and from 1979, as everybody knows, it was shown in Birdman of Paradise, the ABC film that I did, that learning about finding nests and that sort of stuff, you learned about animal behaviour and birding behaviour, and it was never always just about birds for me. It was also about a whole heap of things in the whole environment, and I think I became so in tune but from a very early age, running around the mountains, because we lived on a 5,000-acre property.
Wow.
And running sheep, and that's where I first cut my teeth with powerful owls and all that sort of stuff in the early days, and so it was a long process, but it was an absolute learning curve. And as far as I'm concerned, there's no tertiary education could possibly come close to being there and doing the real thing.
I read an article recently. A lot of kids and youth are getting into birding, like more so than they were even 20, 30, 40 years ago. So there's some good signs that young people are turning to bird watching, and maybe COVID's had something to that. People are looking more around at the natural world that's on their doorstep.
Well, I think the important thing is I also did birding guides. When Graham Pizzi was alive, him and I were great friends. I used to lead Bird Week at Riley's Guest House in the Border Ranges near Brisbane, and we did that for 7 years. But I think the important thing is, for me, is to, instead of taking everything to the grave, as Dr. Rod Kavanagh often says I shouldn't do, is to pass it on to the younger generation. And if what I'm doing, even what we're doing today, if it helps and gets somebody enthusiastic doing things and looking after our environment, because whether we like it or not, global warming is a serious problem. We can't just push it under the carpet. So And our environment is suffering because it's really interesting. In 1976, I found my first rufous owls nesting, and there'd only been 2 nests seen before that. And they used to always lay eggs about the first week in September. Well, now it's back to June. Since 1976, things have changed so much. Two-billed bowerbirds used to nest in December. Now it's back to October, so things are changing. There's no question, and that's what education's about, and I need to give something back.
Yes. So are you one of those people who went around Australia and tried to photograph all the birds? You know, what was your journey in being a bird watcher?
Definitely not photography. I've taken photographs over the years, probably a lot since the early 80s, but, you know, it's not been my primary concern. In the early days, I was learning about the biology and, you know, obviously looking for nests and eggs, and that was my thing. I spent the whole time learning about the birds. Birding photography is fine, so long as you don't overdo it, and some do, unfortunately. They see the almighty photograph as it, and then they forget about the bird. But for me, the biology of it and learning about it helps with conservation, and you cannot protect something until you know where it lives and what it needs, and that's what's come back to home with me, because I think there's only about 5 or 6 species in Australia now I've never seen a nest of, and most people haven't even seen that many birds. So it's been my thing since I was a kid, and the night parrot was my last triumph. Well, probably not. The quail thrush on the Atherton tablelands, the nest and eggs hadn't been found, and I've since done that 4 times in recent years, in the last 2 years.
Oh, that's extraordinary. So did you become interested in rare and elusive birds after you'd seen kind of all the birds that there were to see, and you thought, well, I'll go after the rare ones now, or I'll go after the extinct ones, you know?
I'm just not sure how to answer that one, but I think, you know, in the early days, you know, there was, you know, only 2 people in the world that had ever seen nest and eggs, Sid Jackson and Mervyn Goddard. Mervyn Goddard was my mentor, one of the best field naturalists in the country. And there's only 2 of them seen the nest and eggs of the rufous scrubbird, and I think I became the 3rd one, and I found a few. And only a few years ago, I found one nest with 2 eggs in the morning at 8 o'clock, another one at 4:15 with 2 eggs, because I learned how to find them simply by watching. And I think the thing that's taught me the most over the years, when you find a new species or a bird you've never seen before nesting, sit back and watch it, and just do it for a couple of days, watch all their behaviour, see how far away they go. And a lot of birds, it's really interesting over time, when they're coming to the nest, one of the things they do a lot before, while a female's been off feeding, she'll come back and she'll sit on a branch facing the nest, not too far away, and she'll preen herself, get herself ready to go back and sit down in the nest, and that gives it away so many times. And I learnt a lot of stuff about that, but every bird's the same. But rare stuff, night parrot was just another world. Everybody thought it was gone. And, you know, it hadn't been seen alive officially since 1887, I think. And yeah.
How did you know what you were looking for?
Next question. Don't have good answer.
There were illustrations, yeah?
Look, the thing, I knew exactly what, you know, I'd read about the night parrot since I was 10-year-old. And, you know, there was photo pictures of it, and there was old I think there was skins in museums, and, you know, skins in museums are okay, but so long as we don't have too bloody many. But anyway, look, I looked at that, and because I realised it was nocturnal, I looked at the eyes, how big and huge they were. I read about the guy that found them and got them, and I think he got 16 at the time. Can't think of his name right offhand. It was all in the Gawler Ranges. But pretty well, when I seriously decided to do it was in 1989, and by that time I'd already worked with you know, nearly all the owls in Australia, because I just spent a considerable amount of time, nearly 10 years, working on a book with Dr. David Holmes. I'll just get it out. Birds of the Night by Dr. David Holmes. Him and I worked together on that for 10 years, and because of working on stuff on nocturnal, I knew the parrot was nocturnal, and that was a door opener to do and start where I did.
Did you have a hunch that it was still around?
Absolutely. You know, there'd been too many things, and in 1990, Walter Bowles from the Australian Museum, him and Wayne Longmore and another guy found a bird dead on the side of the road. It was a night parrot. That was one of the first official sightings, right back from about 1912, I think, when supposedly there was another skin found which disappeared. So that was the first one for the 1900s have been confirmed. So then I knew things were on and it was out there.
Mm. So what did you do? Pack a swag and start looking?
That's funny. Look, I was born and raised in the bush. I've learned to live off the land. I've learned to do all sorts of things, and I think it just become a time for me to start looking, travelling a lot, camping and roughing it, and living in some pretty remote spaces. It was always talked about it being in Spinifex, so I thought the chances are that it's probably going to be in that somewhere, wherever it is. And I never even heard a thing for the first when I started to look for it in the late 90s. I never heard a thing until what was it? April 2012 at 12 was the first time I heard the bird. I wasn't sure of it to know what it was, but that's what it was. And for 8 years before that, I hadn't seen or heard a thing. And I tell you what, the desert is a very, very harsh place. There was times out there at one stage where it went for a week, where I was in the desert for nearly 5 months. And 1 week, it went from between 50 to 52 degrees every day. And right through the night, I was up to 40 degrees during the night in the desert with hardly any water and flies by the millions. It was no easy task. So
if I'm doing my PhD thesis on the night parrot and I've got 3 days to do field work, I'm probably not going to find it.
I think you probably even won't get past the first page reading about it.
So that's what I love about you, John. You've been out there for so many years, for so many months at a time, traversing these outback cattle stations. Or, they must be hundreds of kilometres wide, some of these properties you've become friendly with.
Well, one of the properties that, See, the thing was in the early days, I come back and I used to look at it when I started to seriously look at in the 90s, I sort of occasionally looked from 1989, that's when I started. I mentioned that I'd done it for 15 years, it was way longer than that. But I got onto one property that was 225 k's from one boundary to the other. The manager of the property had to fly from one side to the other. Now, over 3 years, I crisscrossed every inch of that. It was over 2 million hectares. To look for stuff and, in some very inhospitable conditions. There was days when it was just stinking hot, and there was the engine on the car, because I drove the Toyota across those places, which I should never have done. The slightest thing that went wrong, I wouldn't have got out of there, I don't think, but maybe so, because I can live in the bush. But even so, being out there, hot, heat, no, just enough water, because when I used to do the cooking in the night time, I used to save the cooking water to do the washing up during the daytime. You just could not take a risk. And a lot of the time I didn't have the water to wash my plates. I just had to let them in the sun with 50 degrees heat and let the ants clean them. That's how bad it was. I can't tell you what it was like. No words can describe those 15 years of my life doing that stuff. And I'm not big noting myself, not at all. It's just what I did to find the bird, and I am so glad I did. I know there's been negativity, but who cares? Who cares? I got the bird, and there's a lot of other places now. Well, not a lot, but there's a few other places in WA, and that have now got them as well because of those efforts. Yeah,
we'll talk about that. So describe to me, please, the first time you heard it, because you've heard all these other birds in your life and you've seen all the birds except 5 nests, I think you said.
That's right.
So you know what all those other birds sound like. Then when you hear this strange call, you're thinking, well, that could be it.
Well, the night, how I ended up at the point with my friend James Hardy, a young guy that was working with me, we'd been there for quite a few days, and I do know calls. I know them very well, because when you're looking at breedy birds, so many birds, you've got so many different calls, in season, out of season, whether the bird's coming to the nest, whether it's a male feeding the female, whether he's calling off the nest, everything is very distinctive, and I am very attuned to that. But this night at 12:10, 2:07, we were camped in the middle of Brighton Downs, close to where the birds are now, and this strange call woke me up. Normally I can sleep through nightjars. There were spotted nightjars everywhere. There was out nightjars. There was a distant booble. After a while, they just become ho-hum and you just go to sleep. But if something distinct, which I've always done, and most people know that know me. I can be there, and if it's a call I've never heard before, it wakes me up. It's like being hit in the side of the head with a sledgehammer. That's how it is to me. And I heard this thing way off going, did it, and I thought, what the hell is that? And during the night, and in amongst the spinifex and in the line of where this thing had flown 11 kilometres away, I thought, just maybe. And I listened for a while, and it was so soft I could barely hear it. And then I woke a young fellow up there that was with me, who'd been with me a lot, and James. And I said, "Can you hear that?" And he said, "That sounds like a parrot." And I said, "That's what I think." I said, "I wouldn't mind betting this is a night parrot. Nothing else I've ever heard calls like that, and we're in the right habitat." So I mimicked it, and then my mimic was nothing like what it sounded like. And when it flew over, I heard him hit the deck, because in the desert of a night time, you can just about hear a mouse run across the gibbers at 50 metres away on a still night. Everything just echoes. And this thing landed, it ran around the ground. I could hear it doing a bit of buzzing. Then all of a sudden, it did it. And it was close. It was 15 metres away. I was just standing there absolutely numb. It was ridiculous. And I said to this guy, I said, he said, "We should be able to look." I said, no, don't put the torch on it. We've got to learn about this thing. That's why I'm saying I'm not a photographer. I do professional stuff, but I'm not doing it for that. And after a while, he said, "We've got sound recorders." "Oh, we've got an 816 Xenide. We should be doing it." And young eyes in the dark. Mine were a little bit older, maybe a couple of weeks older, but they were a little bit older, and he fixed it up, and we got the first sound ever. And after a while, I thought, the female turned up pretty soon after a few minutes. I could hear her running around the ground. They were chatting. Then I said, let's play it back and just see if they answer and see if it's going to be possible to find more. I did. And to this day, I have no idea why, but the bloody thing just vanished. There was no calls, no nothing. Right. And there was nothing more after that until I finally got them on the 26th of May, 2013. Sure, some of you have had a budgerigar, they're a little bit aggressive, and they do that little scolding buzz. That's a little bit what it sounds like. But very short, stubby tail, but very distinct flight, quite rapid. But also when they're coming up out of the spinnerbacks on dust, they have this little flicking flight thing, which I've only just recently seen with another population. But it's a very distinct bird, lives in the harshest environment. I often look at it now and I think, because I've got them in the Diamantina. I found 3 nests in the Diamantina, 2 with 2 eggs and 1 with 4 eggs. I've got them in Gonaway National Park, which my wife, Lindy, when we were married, she heard them clearly, and then I heard them as well coming water. And also heard them on Mount Windsor. And I've got them in the desert, and I've also got them in another place now. So I've got them in 5 locations myself personally. Yeah. And it's going to keep growing, I would think.
How many are estimated to be in Australia? Are you aware of any estimate numbers?
Oh, look, mate, anyone, how big's a stone in the middle of the Gibber Desert if you haven't seen it? That's the only way to say. I don't think there's many at all, really. I've done a lot of looking around, and I'm starting to work it out now. I can go to a place now and I can pretty well pick that they're likely to be there or they're not likely to be there. No guarantees. Yeah. But I think, if there's 30 places in Australia where they are, that'll be a bloody lot as far as I can see.
Mm-hmm. So now you've heard it, you know that it's there, how much longer was it before you were actually able to see it?
Well, we first confirmed the call in July 2012, probably 800 metres away from where I actually took the first images ever. And, we were so excited that night that we played the call and this bloody thing answered right underneath me. And my friend Corey Mead and Adrian Hayward, both very good birders, were there, and we just didn't sleep. And we spent the next week and a half possibly there every evening just on dusk, and every morning about 3 o'clock in the morning we used to go there and you'd hear them coming back, because I just likened it to looking for owls. It had the same sort of behaviour, just on dusk. Being fed 3 times a night seemed to be pretty normal. And going back to bed of a night time, you get sooty owls or powerful owls. They do those calls, coming back to the roost, and usually the last call is about 100 metres away from where they sleep during the day, and this is exactly what the night parrot did, and that's what's given it away.
Look, at risk of repeating a little bit of the podcast you did with Michael, if you could just tell us a little bit about, seeing it for the first time, what was the impact on you? What did you actually see? What time was it?
It was around 6:30, 6:35 at that time, and what had happened 2 nights before, we'd actually picked up this new pair because the first one I found, I hadn't heard them for nearly 6 months, so I looked for another one. But when I did find them, I realised after sitting there with my friend John Stewart, who stayed with me for the last 5 years and pretty well come with me on every trip, and I'm sure after seeing the flies the way he did, he'd probably think, God, if I ever go with that bloody John Young again, if he ever rings me up and says, you want to go look at the night parrots, I'm going to say no. It was so rough. But anyway, so 2 nights in a row we heard the bird call. The male would call, then she would answer, then they'd do this little line and head down through through the spinnerbecks through a little opening, and that's where we decided to sit. When we did actually see it, it dropped out of the spinifex in front of us. Not what I expected. I thought it'd come around the side, but it didn't. And it dropped out of the spinifex on the ground after I played this buzzing call. And I just couldn't believe it. When it hit the ground, it just almost looked like an echidna, like something from outer space. I thought, this bloody thing's going to have 3 heads. God knows, no one's ever seen one. And I just couldn't believe it. It was a numbing experience. But the worst part about it, which was a bigger numbing, and the heart dropped through the boots, when it came out, I turned my flash on. I had a new Nikon D800. I turned the flash on, lifted the camera slowly, fired a shot without looking through it because I didn't want to scare it. I was only a few metres away. And when I looked at the photograph, there was just a bit of bloody grass moving. I was oh, God. I just about died anyway. It disappeared. I got a fright with the flash, and then a few minutes later, it ran across the space just over past John, and I just spun the camera around, fired, and I got a head, tail, and full frame. Then I got John to put 2 lights on, and then for the next half hour, I did things from every angle possible, right down to laying on the ground, looking over at it. With moon in the background, I took over 600 images, and it was freezing that night, and I had sweat pouring out of me. And when I stood up and we took the light off, I said, okay, that's enough. And we let it go, and I just stood there and said, holy shit, what did we just see? This thing has not been seen alive since 1887. I've never been in a position like that where words had it was just unbelievable. It was incredible. People thought this thing was gone. Tens of thousands of people were looking for it, and it was under our noses all the time, and people just didn't know how to do it. We got it. We were the first ones, and words can't tell you what that was like. So you've got all these images, you find your wife, you show her, you show someone else in the birding world. Lloyd Nelson, yeah.
Very soon it's being written up, and people are comprehending that this bird that has not been seen since the 19th century is living in outback Queensland. Yep. And since then there's been other sightings. Tell us about some of those. I know there was a sighting in Western Australia, Nigel Jacket.
Nigel and Jacket and Bruce Greatwich, I know them very well, and I respect them. And they came to my first 2 talks to learn a bit of stuff about them, and also along the way they were recording calls and asked me would I listen to the calls, what they were sending, and they did send some along the way. Mm-hmm. And as I said to Nigel at the time, I said, I don't know what the hell you got here, but I wouldn't write it off. It just might be them. You just never know.
So it didn't sound exactly like the recordings you had?
Not at all.
Right.
But it's like a lot of things, if you're looking for grass trends, I mean, every grass trend's got a different call, but they've all got that little little similarity. And this thing that Nigel had recorded, I think Nigel or Bruce, either one, and I think they were together. And they recorded the call, and when I heard it, I thought, God, that's got some similarities. I wonder, is it? And I said to them at the time, I said, don't write it off. I can't give you an answer. I don't know what the hell it is because I've never heard it before. And I said, it just might be. And to their credit, they put the effort in and they suddenly realised they'd been listening to this thing. And then I think it was them and Adrian Boyle and I forget who else there was at the time. And they were doing some walking in the morning and it flew up. And I think Bruce Gratwich got the first image, and good on them.
Yeah.
But it all stemmed from Brighton Downs. That's where it all started. So I've just got a brand new site, which is out of sight. I think I did say at the time, don't ask me about location, Canberra, Kerra, Darwin. That's the location. But I've got 10 pairs already. There may be, I don't know, it could be 3 times that many. The piece of habitat is 20 kilometres long, about 1.5 km wide, and I'm a third of the way through it.
You're not done. What's your goal here? I mean, you have seen the Night Parrot. We could tick that off, John, and sort of kick back. I'm sure there's there's a career for you just sitting at home on the lounge, writing your next book.
No, mate, I'm not into that. Look, ever since I gave my collecting away and that sort of stuff, and I got into filmmaking, I mean, I've been on the cameraman and BBC and all sorts of stuff in a lot of programs. I had my own television show for 7 years. My whole goal now has been conservation and doing stuff. Mahogany glider, I help protect that. I've built wetlands, I've protected forests, all sorts of stuff over the time. And my goal is now is to find as many of these things as I can and try and conserve them as much as I can. And when I do, on the properties, I won't be giving locations out. That's just a given. Yeah. But I'm going to talk to the landholders who are the custodians of the place and give them the respect they deserve. Yes. Because sometimes, we tend to love things to bits, and sometimes... And in fact, a lot of the times, when human beings get involved in it, that's when the trouble starts. The fact of the matter is, whether we like it or not, you only got to look at the world. We're the biggest virus this world's ever seen. We're capable of destroying, huge forests in a few hours by 2 D9 bulldozers with rollers in between them. Do we need to go out and get in amongst some of these rare birds and hassle them for the rest of their life? Definitely not. So conservation is my thing. Why am I doing it? Bugger the lounge, mate. I can't do that. I've got too many things to do instead of sitting on the lounge. I want to go and find new things, and I want to help conserve them, and I want to teach others. And by doing the stuff that I'm doing right now and what I did with Michael Greenshields, who I also respect, I want to be able to put things out there and say, look, we've got some really beautiful things out here. Why aren't we doing good things instead of wrecking the planet? That's what I'm doing. And I'm going to find as many populations of these night parrots as I possibly can if I get the financial backing, because I can't do it by myself. Yes.
Well, John, this has been extraordinary. I feel like I'm talking with birding royalty here. I do thank you so much for giving me time to talk on this interview, and many people will be interested in this. And as you say, the bigger picture here is conservation. Yes. It's not just about ticking off a species.
No, I'm not a ticker. Look, I understand and people wanting to see birds. That's good for tourism, not just that, but if motels make money, the amount of money that's made out of birding tourism is just incredible, and we can't afford to lose it. But there is a cut-off point where you've got to not just take a photograph and say, well, I've got a photograph of the bird now, it doesn't matter. For me, the photograph is the last thing on my mind. I'm just about to work on something where I think I may have buff-breasted button quails, which is the last bird to be photographed in Australia because I've only got a blurred image. And if I get them, I'm going to spend a hell of a lot more time on them as well and find out how many more there is. So that's my goal. My work's just beginning.